I was born in a place called Condobolin in the Diocese of Wilcannia-Forbes. Just a kid growing up in a country town. No pets, but we had chooks. When I was in primary school, I got rheumatic fever, and as a small fellow, I was committed to bed for quite some time, for some years, and that was to be an effect in my life later, particularly when I was being sent to the army. My parents were very religious as a man and a woman, and they passed that on to each one of us. I had 4 sisters, 2 above me and 2 below me. The eldest one and the youngest one are both nuns. They were mercy nuns for our diocese. See, I was different to them because I spent such a lot of time in bed, just in the house. When I was still in primary school, the nuns of the convent school in Condobolin expelled me. I think it was because I didn't take any things too seriously or seriously enough. I just used to laugh at all sorts of things when they didn't see it as funny. When people said things, I just found them funny. Just enjoying living, and even when I was confined to bed, I would enjoy being able to laugh. That must have been tough on my mum, I suppose. My dad was a barber in Condobolin, my mum a nurse, and they had to find another school for me, and they didn't want me to go to the Condobolin public school, so they sent me to a boarding school in Forbes called Red Bend College. I really loved it there because one of the greatest things in my life is a love for sport. I just love sport and played a lot of sport. It's the way that people get out and mix freely, and your teammates are very important to you as friends. I don't mean so much on the field as friends, as a person, and that was very important. The biggest one was rugby, and I got to like and love rugby. Years later, when I was sent to the army, I got very involved in rugby union, and I did a lot of playing and coaching of rugby. Suddenly, my bishop told me I was going to the army. When I was first ordained, 1962, we had enough priests in the diocese, so he didn't have anywhere to send me. So he put me as a chaplain to an old people's home somewhere out of Forbes. Then he transferred me to Broken Hill for a short time before they decided he would send me to the army. I had no idea what I had to do, but one of the big things was still sport. I still love sport because all the people that you played with became really good, worthwhile friends for life. You stayed friends with them on and off the field. And when I had been in bed and been sick as a youngster, people did lots of things just to make me happy. I was very, very conscious of how much people had done to help me in my sickness over the years. And as a result, when I did my leaving certificate, I decided I wanted to find a job where whatever I did would help people because so many people had helped me. That was the only thing. The priesthood came up and I never thought otherwise. So I was accepted and I was sent to the seminary in Springwood. I did 3 years of seminary training, and at the end of 3 years, the people in charge of the seminary called me in and told me that I was not suited to be a priest, and so they sacked me. That was that, and they rang and told the bishop that they didn't want me to come back because I wasn't suited. I was delighted because I'm not a really holy person, so I was pleased I had made an effort and I had tried to do the right thing, but I had been a failure. I was only home a short time when the bishop rang me and told me that they were not my boss, he was, and I'm going back. But not back to Springwood, but to Manly. And so everything just went on as normal from then on for the next 5 years until I was ordained. That's the class that were ordained. When I came out, the bishop said he had nowhere to send me, so my first appointment was to this old people's home out of Forbes, and I was sent to Broken Hill, and I had one of the worst things you could do as a brand new priest. I had to go and knock on the door of a family and tell them that their son, who was in the Navy, I think, had been washed overboard in a ship and they would never ever recover the body. And that was just something I never ever forgot. It was the first time. It was terrible. I enjoyed Broken Hill and I enjoyed South Broken Hill, just mixing with people. It was just important to be friendly to people. And the big thing about being friendly was to get to know their either name or nickname. And that was important to me. And when I got sent to the army, not having been really in a parish, I was just a curate in a parish. I was born in 1937 and I was sent to the army in 1965. I did not have any choice, I was just sent. I was neither happy nor unhappy, I didn't care, I just was doing what the bishop sent me. So when they accepted me, I was already a chaplain. When I was sent to the army, I was given the rank of captain, that I had to do what I was told to do. And I was told immediately that you paid respect to everybody who was superior to you. And the way you paid respect was a salute. And many times I got into trouble for saluting soldiers, because every time I saw or met or passed a girl soldier, I saluted her, because my mum had taught us that we must pay respect to females, and she did. I get into trouble for that time after time. But that's what I did because I believed in it. We at times had to give lectures on life, how to behave. But we also had to do services. From Ingleburn, I went to Vietnam. So I went over and saw the bloke who was in charge of that unit, and he would be in charge of us in Vietnam, and asked for his permission not to carry a rifle in Vietnam, because I wanted the soldiers to know I was in there for them, not the war. I went to Vietnam by ship. I went over by ship so I could get to know the people I was going to be working with. We did all sorts of things on board the ship, and I just joined in all of them as if I was just another soldier. I wanted to go wherever our soldiers went, so if they went out on duty, I would ask permission and be able to go out on that with them, so that I witnessed a lot of what they as soldiers had to do. I said Mass regularly. I mixed with the soldiers wherever they were. One day when we were talking just in conversation about things, and he said, "Oh, Tink, I still say my rosary, even though we're under fire at times, and in order to make sure that I remember to do it rightly, I have a packet of 10 cigarettes which they give us in our rations, and so I use my cigarettes as my 10 Hail Marys, and I bought a cigar so I would have a cigar for the Our Fathers for when we went through the rosary, and I still am loyal to it." One day an American soldier came and saw me. He had gone and bought me a present for how much he enjoyed the Mass he had been at. He gave me a present, and then before he walked away, he pulled out another present and he said, "I bought one for your wife too." And as it turned out, he wasn't Catholic. Well, when we got back from Vietnam, very soon after we were back, I was posted or sent to Wagga, to where the people were doing their initial training. So I was involved with them. I was able to tell them about my experience in Vietnam with soldiers, and it was freezing bloody cold and I hated it. Middle of December, they sent me from there to Townsville, where I was working with soldiers preparing to go to the war, and also with them. While I was in Townsville in the army barracks, there's a little town called Magnetic Island just off Townsville, the coast, and while I was there, pretty close to Christmas time, we had a cyclone, and boy did it make a mess of the Townsville place, but also apparently this little island. So how lucky were the local people, because all the soldiers were sent out to clean up the mess on Magnetic Island, and I went out with them. But my next appointment was to Singapore, and it was the same temperature as Townsville. It was magnificent. I just loved it. And we were working with the English as much as with the Australian soldiers in Singapore, and it was just fantastic. One night where I was living, it was in a soldier's mess, but it was British, not Australian. One night, one of the blokes living with me asked me did I want to go out with them for a night out at a nightclub in Singapore. And so I was delighted, and I went with them, a group of English soldiers. When we were at the nightclub, one of the nightclub tables had a brawl among themselves. And as it turned out, they were also British. They were British sailors just overnight in Singapore, and they were having a fight, and so the people in charge of the nightclub called us all to attention, and I thought the way he spoke he was going to send us all off, close the place down. Instead of that, he found out that the reason they were having their fight was they were arguing among each other over who, of all these British sailors, had the best tattoo. And so instead of closing the nightclub, they called all the nightclub to attention to vote, and all of these sailors had to get up and have us all vote on their tattoo. And it was the first time in all my life that I ever saw this. One of the tattoos was a W on each cheek of his backside, and when he bent over it was wow, and we all had to vote on that. I could not believe. I've seen a lot since wow, but he didn't win it. He came second. The bloke who won it was a farmer in England. They had a fox running up his bum with the tail of the fox coming out, and all around his bum on the tattoo was horses and dogs and people chasing this fox up his tail. So he won. I found that quite extraordinary. 2 years in Singapore and absolutely loved it. Worked very carefully with all the soldiers. I'm not sure of the actual details. I think I went to Sydney, and I think I was in Sydney for many years. When I was at Ingleburn and I didn't like certain things they told me that I had to do, they said, "Oh, don't worry, you don't have to worry, because you'll get used to them, and army chaplains are only allowed to stay in the army for 6 years, so you'll get so used to them." And it was only when I reached my 6th year, I don't know where I was, probably Sydney, that they kept signing me on for year after year after year. And a lot of time around Rockhampton. Brisbane I spent a lot of time, but always in army camps. And when army camps went out to army exercises, I always went out with them. I was an army chaplain for 27.5 years. I learnt that people are important in the church, and it was important to make the people feel like they were welcome whenever they were at anything to do with the church. And when I finished my 27.5 years and I was sent back to the diocese, it was my first time in a parish as a parish priest, and it was to a place called Hay, where I had to learn how to be a priest in Australia. I didn't want them to call me father or anything else, but I had learnt to learn by a nickname, Tink, and that's how I introduced myself in the parishes. And I learnt that inviting them to be a part of a parish service was getting them to be a Eucharistic minister or a reader, and I had found out that that was really, really important, not just to me, but to the parish. And so that's what I worked on wherever I went. I went to Hay for 4 years. I didn't know what Aussie Rules was. I became the water boy, but I did it for the second grade and the 17s, only just to meet them without preaching to them. And I was just the water boy for them for 20 years. The bishop sent me back to Broken Hill, and I was quite happy going to Broken Hill. But I don't know how it happened, but I had a breakdown, a total, complete breakdown. And they couldn't leave me in a parish, so they told me to retire. Then they somehow or other got the message, and they, instead of retiring, they sent me to Red Bend College as a chaplain, and I had several years there as a chaplain, just trying to get used to being with people again. And I absolutely loved it. And I enjoyed mixing with them in whatever they did, and particularly sport. Every person has a special interest, and so I found it was important to me to find out what their interest was and to take an interest in that interest to share with them in discussion. When you met them, you didn't sit down and talk about God or about Mass or about sacraments. You just talked about what their interest was. And as time went on, they would bring forth the fact that they have a newborn baby and they wanted it baptised. Would I be able to do the baptism? Or they had found a bridegroom or a bride, and would I be able to do the marriage for them? So I did lots of marriages, and I did a lot of funerals for the same attitude. It means to me that I am a subject of God. God has arranged for me to be born, and so my faith is being loyal to God. Talk to God, believing in God, and just talking to God. Talking to people about God, if they are prepared to, about what the church has to offer, services, Mass particularly, because I spent those early years just in bed, but my most grateful thing is life, being able to mix with people, not be pompous towards them, but just friendly, try to meet them one-on-one, and that's where nicknames or first names meant a lot to me. It meant that they became your friends, and a lot of them would pick on me. When I got down here, I didn't know anything about Aussie rules, and I picked the magpies, not knowing who they were, but I have found that a lot of people pick on me about the magpies, but it's a fun thing, not an angry thing. I played a lot of sport. One year, when I was at Wagga, I was picked in the Riverina side to tour New Zealand playing rugby union. So I enjoyed that, and somehow or other the bishop must have given me permission to go on the tour, because I toured New Zealand playing rugby. Not as a priest, I was just another player. I just try to talk to God as if I'm just talking to you. When I pray, I say, God, I had trouble today. I didn't tell people that they were doing this or not doing that. Please help me to do it in the future. So I tend to pray in normal Australian, not English, but normal Australian language. Just, sorry God, sorry about that. Love God, love your neighbour. Love God, love your neighbour, and everybody you meet is your neighbour. So just be nice to people all the time. If there's any way you can help people, do so. So whether it be by just having a conversation with them until get rid of their temper a bit. See, some of those people leave the church or don't come, and I just want them to feel comfortable with the church. It's important to me that people are comfortable with God